stock? New market?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everybody. I know everybody's having great conversation around the table. The salmon looks delicious. Not that we would know. They don't feed us. Thanks, everybody, for being here at this conference. I want a big thanks to Scott and Jane for having CNBC here. I'm Brian Sullivan of CNBC, according to surveys, like America's 14th or 15th most trusted news anchor. So I'm very happy to be here. Also, the only news anchor in the last 24 hours that's seen a bear. And I don't mean like somebody negative on the stock market. I mean an actual bear. So it's a great conference. I think I've been off and on here for about a decade. It's evolved and changed. But what hasn't evolved and changed is the quality of the guests that come here. Everybody here represented social media, media, a lot of lawyers, by the way. There's no cheering on that, Robert. There's no cheering. We have a lawyer here. I also have a law degree, but do not practice. So like the Indigo Girls saying, I got my paper and I was free. So this is a great conference. A lot of heavy hitters here. And I want to start with a disclaimer that none of you are going to be happy when this is over, because all of you want something different from this gentleman right here. This is the Federal Trade Commission Chair, Andrew Ferguson. Let's give him, whatever your political views, give him a big round of applause. Because for those of us in the public service, we are on United or Delta. There's a lot of other jets at the Aspen Airport I saw, which don't have a name on them. And we're not on, I'm not on those planes anyway. So it's not the easiest place to get to, but look at this. It's absolutely stunning. And here's what I would call on CNBC and RBI, random but interesting. Chair Ferguson and I went to high school about 45, 50 minutes from each other on the I-81 corridor in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, Winchester, Virginia, Harrisonburg, Virginia. These are places that all you DC denizens have heard about but never actually been, unless your kid goes to JMU. So that's what I just say. That's exactly. Or you're on your way to UVA or the better school, Virginia Tech, my alma mater. So who groaned? It was a joke. Anyway, so we got a lot to get to. Let's jump right in. Chair Ferguson, thank you. We do have a little bit of breaking news, actually, in the media, which I want to get your comment on to start this off. A few minutes ago, Paramount Skydance filed a lawsuit against states' attorneys general regarding the Warner Brothers potential planned merger. They're asking them to put up a bond of $1.8 billion, basically under the Clayton Act. It's complicated. Let the lawyers sort it out. But there is, Chair Ferguson, some concern that if these state-by-state reviews of deals, Colorado, by the way, where we are, has one, if they are allowed to go forward, it could halt or at least hurt M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I know the news is fairly new. Your take.
Sure. I'm also pleased to be here, and thank you for doing this. So I was a state enforcer and brought a lawsuit against Google when I was the Solicitor General of Virginia alongside the federal government. So my perspective as both a federal enforcer and a state enforcer, and my experience in both of those says to me, state enforcement is not a bad thing. And the best evidence of this is that when Congress passed the Clayton Act in 1914, they expressly gave states the power to enforce its proscriptions and to challenge deals. Now that's been true for more than a century, and we have not seen an incredible, even recently, we've not seen an incredible push among the states to challenge deals. I honestly don't think that's going to change that much for two reasons. One, states have pretty severe jurisdictional and resource constraints. They have to, there has to be some sort of jurisdictional hook to their state in order to review any of these deals. For some deals, they'll have sort of like cross-cutting national effects, and states can probably get at those. But for most deals, that actually isn't going to be true. And so I don't think that this is a proposed sea change. And number two, they have real resource constraints. I have them. Congress cut my budget by about 10% year over year. The president has asked for a substantial increase for the FTC. But the states have even more severe constraints. And state attorneys general are appropriately focused primarily on stuff that is happening uniquely in their state. Frauds and scams that happen in their state. Crimes that happen in their state. And, I think
but they're going after this merger.
Yeah.
So this is those lawsuits against the deal are not just centered on those issues. They are going after what would be a national and international merger.
Yeah, so there have always been some deals and some conduct that are sort of politically potent enough that the states are going to involve themselves. Virginia participating in Google against the United States in the ad tech monopoly case is a perfect example of that. We devoted a lot of resources to that, even though that was a national issue, but part of the reason is because of the way people felt about Google. There are always going to be some mergers and some cases where the states are going to involve themselves, and Congress wrote the law that way. I just don't think that for the mine run of mergers and for the entire merger ecosystem, that state enforcement is going to be a substantial sort of like obstacle in the road. I could be proven wrong about this, but I've been in the states before. They have way more serious resource constraints than we're thinking, and they also have higher priorities about the things that actually affect their states in a unique way, and they have to answer to their voters.
So putting a finer point on it, same question asked differently, sounds like you are not concerned that these state AG's lawsuits against this potential merger will stifle or harm future M&A.
Future M&A, no. I don't want to comment on the specific deal because it's ongoing, and the Department of Justice, of course, reviewed that deal. I just don't think that the increased political focus on the left on state enforcement is likely to impose meaningful constraints on the M&A ecosystem. I understand why state AGs will want to say things like that. It's a potentially powerful thing to say on the stump, but the reality of resource constraints and jurisdictional constraints remain what they are.
We've seen incredible deals. You could argue if we were sitting around and saying what are the best 5 deals of all time, I think you'd have to put Google buying YouTube for $1 billion up there, Meta, Facebook then, buying Instagram for $1 billion up on these lists. Would those deals get done? Would they be allowed today?
It's always dangerous to answer hypotheticals, so I guess, look.
It's dangerous to ask them too.
Yeah. Well, no, you get a free shot. Meta Instagram is maybe the easiest for me to answer because the FTC challenged that acquisition just several years ago. The first Trump administration filed a suit in 2020 about it. We continued to take the suit to trial, and we're appealing it now. Again, would that merger have gone through today? I would like to think that we probably would have had the same reaction to it that we're having today. But it is important to remember that merger enforcement is predictive. All of it is predictive. We have 2 companies or more, depending on the situation, trying to merge, and we, the enforcers, have to make a prediction about the likely economic effects of that merger. The companies often have a diametrically opposed view. They have plenty of economists who are going to give the diametrically opposed view. We have economists giving our view. But at the end of the day, if it's a prediction, Meta Instagram, we remain quite convinced that the evidence after the merger bore out that that merger should not have gone through. I'd like to think that we would have made the correct prediction in 2013, but it's always hard to know.
Do you see any mergers of that scale and size left to do when you look out?
Maybe. I mean,
maybe in like cable TV. Just throwing that one out there.
Yeah. Fortunately, FTC doesn't do those.
But you have a lot of say and weight in how things are viewed.
Yeah. Look, I mean, size is a relevant factor in merger review. And I know that that's what makes it splashy on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but that isn't the primary focus of antitrust analysis in this country. And frankly, Europe says it's not. I think it might be, but it's not supposed to be in Europe either. There are all sorts of other considerations that are supposed to matter. We won a merger trial, $1 billion merger trial on Friday. That was not a mega blockbuster merger, but the evidence that we adduced showed that it was probably going to increase prices a lot for construction adhesives. And that, in my view, matters just as much as the mega merger, because those are the ones that could otherwise go under the radar. They're going to increase input costs for constructing homes in America, or in my case, fixing up a home, like I do at home. And we won this merger trial on Friday, not to a ton of fanfare, but this is a huge win for the American people, and I think that it is as important or more important than the mega mergers that splash all over the front pages of the Wall Street Journals. And it wasn't about deal size, it was about market concentration and likely effects, risk of coordination and things like that.
Well, you did just put out a comment on John Deere. I think you spoke to the Corn Growers Association recently. Good Shenandoah Valley guy here. So we understand that focus is there. There are some in this I would say room, but beautiful outdoor patio, that would argue that your sort of purview is not as objective as it could be. It's a little more subjective. How do you look at deals, the objective, X plus Y equals Z, versus some of the things that got you into this position, which is what some would view as subjective. You don't like it on this factor or that factor. They're almost extrajudicial. How would you respond to that criticism?
So they're extrajudicial only in the sense that I have a $383 million budget and a lot of stuff I have to do. Remember, the FTC is basically two agencies in one. We are an antitrust enforcer and a consumer protection enforcer. And I have to do all of that work with a $383 million budget. And so generally what that means is, and there's another former FTC chairman in the room right now, and I think you'll agree with me, you end up having to make very hard calls about where to deploy resources. Because if you had an infinite budget, you could look at everything equally. And so one of my jobs as a political appointee is to set priorities for how the agency is going to expend its resources. And I said up front, I care primarily about healthcare, other inputs that affect Americans in their daily lives as consumers and participants in markets. And as participants in markets, that also includes their ability to speak online. And I think the way the FTC has spent its resources over the last 18 months is consistent with that. We've brought cases involving the advertising boycott and sued and settled with all of the major advertising firms in America about a boycott that they ran from 2020 to 2024 that was designed to prevent advertising dollars from going to disfavored publishers. We have brought, all of our merger cases have been in healthcare or in home construction. And then we have a major conduct case that we brought last year that's also about home values. It's the Zillow-Redfin consolidation that has to do with internet listing services. And so that has been our focus, is lower costs on it for the American people on the markets they participate most, and for our economic markets that affect our political and social life, like markets where part of the participation is the ability to speak, make sure that those are not subject to illegal antitrust effects that affect both people's bottom lines and their ability to speak their minds.
Well, we have a lot of people in here whose platforms are the ability to speak. Meta, Google, TikTok, all the social media, they're all represented here. What is the right policy priority for managing speech and expression from your perspective online?
Yeah.
These are trillion-dollar questions.
It's not the FTC's job to police individual speech decisions made by Google, Meta, whoever. I see the FTC as having two roles, which is how we have expended our investigative resources. Number one is they can't coordinate on this stuff. If companies want to make independent decisions about speech on their platform, it is what it is. That's how the First Amendment works. But they can't get in a room together and coordinate about who gets to say what online. I think that the evidence in the Murphy against Missouri case demonstrated that a lot of that was going on. The government was facilitating a fair part of that, for which I think every government official that was involved in that coordination should hang their head in eternal shame. Isn't happening anymore. But they can't get in a room and set the rules for the road that everyone's going to follow. We want competition on speech policies. And two, whatever your policies are, you have to follow them. You can't present one form of policy to consumers when they're deciding whether to use their platform and then have a completely different one in practice. That is exactly
Has that happened?
Don't want to talk about any ongoing investigations, but that is the core prohibition of our consumer protection laws. If you make promises to consumers, you have to live up to them. And that is no different for a company that is selling widgets than it is for a company who sells access to speech online. If a company wants to say we allow this type of speech and you have these types of appeal rights and we will do this type of demonetization or this type of shadow banning, okay. But if you say we don't do those type of things and you in fact do, that is exactly what the FTC Act prohibits.
And that's going to get your eyebrows up and your lawyers engaged.
Correct.
Is that happening now?
Don't want to comment on ongoing investigations. But I said from the first week that I was appointed chairman by the president, that we are going to examine to make sure that companies that make representations about their speech policies online are living up to them, and that companies aren't coordinating with each other to set the rules for the road across all the platforms. If we're going to have a competitive economy, that requires that there aren't backroom bargains that deprive consumers of the benefit of competition. That is true with prices. It is true with the policies that govern speech online.
By the way, great job. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
They snuck in. They've adjusted the umbrella because I was getting cooked, my fair Irish skin. So So thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. I'm also stupidly wearing a wool suit, so there's a 1 in 2 chance I'm going to pass out during this interview. So this is fascinating because it goes to so much that's happening in this room. Have you heard about this AI thing?
I heard a bit about it.
It's a thing.
It's in the news from time to time.
It is in the news. It's also at the TPI, Technology Policy Institute, because all the panels before us, AI in the economy, owning AI, quantum theory, et cetera, it's kind of a big deal. CNBC today had a story. It's a big one. If anybody here didn't see it, go check it out. Where like Walmart and others are like partnering up with OpenAI because shopping is now coming to AI. Consumer protection, antitrust. There seems to be some sort of middle ground there between shopping, AI, and the FTC. What's the right way to look at a world that is faster than anything I've seen in 30 years, evolving, and dare I say, taking over?
Yeah, so I think the general view I have is that Europe's approach is the wrong one. Comprehensive AI regulation before AI has really even germinated, which is what the AI Act in Europe was, is the wrong approach. Little regulatory humility is generally not a bad thing. The way that I see it from my little perch at the FTC is that I have a couple concerns. Number one is I want to make sure that the markets for the inputs for AI remain competitive. I don't want there to develop overnight sudden bottlenecked monopolies in the inputs for AI that deprive downstream users of the benefits of competition because someone upstream in the supply chain gets to jack up everyone's prices because it's enjoying a monopoly and maintaining it illegally.
Are you talking about, because I know somebody talks about energy a little bit, are you talking about the energy input costs, the construction input costs, or what's spit out of AI in the sort of intrinsic cost from the technology itself?
Talking mostly about construction, energy, chips. I don't want either existing monopolies to use their monopoly power to maintain their monopolies in illegal ways. I don't want companies to buy up other companies that create monopolies somewhere in the supply chain. Look, from where I'm sitting, the LLM competition is like pretty ferocious. It's like almost a daily iteration of new adjusted LLMs, which to me is a pretty good indication, at least there it's competitive. What I don't want is for prices to be rising because everyone that's trying to make an LLM has to pay a lot of money upstream in the supply chain. That's my principal antitrust concern. My consumer protection concern is that we have all sorts of companies, LLMs, application layer, all making all sorts of promises to consumers to get them to buy their stuff. I want those promises to be real. If you make a promise about something that your product is, that it can do, that it can help you with, that promise has to be honest. It has to do the thing that you're doing. And our consumer protection enforcement in the AI space has been focused on applications that say they can do something and they can't do that thing. The previous administration was taking the view that if an application has a potentially illegal use, like a use that could violate the laws that the FTC enforces, they're going to try to shut down that application. We undid one of those orders and made it very clear, look, the fact that an application can be put to a potentially illegal use does not make the application illegal. That's not how we're going to approach it. But if you have marketing materials that say our product can do this and your product can't do that, it doesn't matter what you're selling. AI, widgets, cost doesn't matter. The promise of our consumer protection laws is that when you make a promise to a consumer, the promise is honest. And we have brought cases against applications that have not lived up to their promises to consumers.
I'm going to, not being political, I'll defend the previous administration in a sense that was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That might as well have been 20 years in AI years, right? Because what I'm talking about is every week they're rolling out new models. Almost every week we talk about them on CNBC. You got Anthropic, you've got OpenAI, obviously you got Gemini, right? Meta's kind of doing their own thing. Do you feel like the playground, let's say it's sort of those 4 or 5, if you threw in an Amazon-ish product, would those 5 be enough for fair competition?
I don't want to predict the future, and I definitely don't want to say that a certain number of competitors is enough for competition, and then in 2 years I look back and go, I really shouldn't have said that. So I don't know.
That's what we're here.
Yeah. I do know that it seems to get easier and easier to build competitive LLMs. The cost that a lot of the big guys had to put in at the beginning in order to build their models, it doesn't seem like everyone has to put in the same costs to make new models or to challenge these models. That, I think, is a good thing. We also had at the very beginning of this AI revolution, and I do think it is a revolution, there was limited access to compute. And so a lot of the AI companies had to strike deals with the companies that had access to hyperscaling in order to even grow their LLMs. But now compute is also growing. I mean, look, I'm just going to give you an example of this. During inauguration and the weeks leading up, I was taking meetings all over the place with all sorts of big business CEOs, small business founders to try to figure out what is happening in the AI ecosystem, anything I should be worried about. And what I heard early on was we have this hyperscaling switching problem where I buy compute from a company, and then I have new compute needs, and I want to move my data from one hyperscaler to another, and they say, sure, but we're going to charge you an exorbitant exit fee. And I went, all right, well, that does sound like a problem. And I mean within 3 months, we had people talking to the same guys oh, no, that's not a problem anymore. There are now all sorts of tools we can use where I can just throw it on all the hyperscalers, access it whenever I need it. This is actually not that big a deal anymore. And I sat there and thought, gosh, if I had spun up an entire investigation on the basis of this thing, by the time I got around to do anything about it, it would have passed me by. It would have been an eon in the development of these products.
It was like Microsoft Netscape.
Yeah.
Did I just state myself on that? Yeah, he's nodding. I don't look. We're about the same age. I think, no, you're much younger. I remember it. But you remember it. And people thought, by the time it was decided, it was moot.
Yeah.
Right? GM US Rails, if you remember that, back in the 30s, General Motors was sued for buying up all these trains and then basically taking the tracks out. They're going to modernize them, but the company was like a secret holding company for GM. They just wanted to sell you cars. I think the court fined him. Remember, I didn't go to UVA law school, so forgive me on this one. I think GM was found guilty, but they fined him $1 because the judge was like, well, it's too late now anyway. Nobody cares. That's how fast AI is moving. So how does the FTC, how do you try to figure out where the puck is going, or do you just kind of react to where we are now because that's, in your view, your judicial purview?
Yeah, so for the LLMs themselves, I'm not going to try to predict where the puck is going, and instead I'm going to focus on what the FTC knows from experience, which is the industrial part of the supply chain that makes the LLMs possible. That is
the concrete, the electricity.
The chips, that is the type of thing that antitrust enforcers are accustomed to, the supply chain, as opposed to trying to predict where a in my view, pretty, at least as of today, competitive, but extremely innovative and extremely fast-changing market at the LLM and application layer is going. Focus on sort of the meat and potatoes part of the supply chain that makes those applications and those models possible. That we can do. That's just ordinary industrial organization, economics, and antitrust. And yes, it's also going to be fast-moving because the supply chain will be wanting to keep up with the models and the applications. But that's the type of thing that we can look at and be like, we've seen this type of thing before. We know when consolidation there becomes dangerous. We know when agreements are likely to raise prices or reduce competition or cut off innovation, as opposed to trying to get out in front of the AI developers don't even know where this is going. It would be insane for a regulator to say, I know where it's going, and I'm going to make predictive regulatory choices on that basis, but further back in the supply chain, that we can apply ordinary antitrust to.
I'll just make a wild hypothetical. If NVIDIA tried to merge with, ARM or Kroger and Albertsons.
I think we would
just randomly pulling out companies out of the hat. Those are real examples, by the way.
I think if NVIDIA and ARM were to merge, we would have to take a very careful look at that. That is antitrust enforcer speak for, we would have concerns.
Yeah. Because of the ultimate input cost to AI, which would then trickle down to what consumers ultimately pay.
Yeah, and not just AI. Look, yes, we all talk about NVIDIA right now because their GPUs are necessary for the models to do their thing. But there are a lot of consumer applications for chips that don't have anything to do with AI. Look, I build my own desktops at home, mostly for fun. And a year ago, I decided that my rig needed to be updated. And I was like, oh, well, RAM is pretty cheap right now. Maybe I'll do that. And then the job got busy, and I was like, I'll take a look at this later. In 6 months, I looked at RAM prices and went, oh my God, I'm not building this right now. This is crazy. And there are consumer applications for all these things that matter independently of AI. So yes, does AI matter? Yes. It matters in large part, I think, not just because innovation is cool, but we can't lose this race with China. And I think that our main competitive edge over the Chinese is that our economy is competitive. And that, yes, competition breeds chaos and it can feel uneasy at times, but that is far likely to generate a winning formula in this race than a command control economy. But we have to make sure that we keep all of the inputs to that competitive, or we're going to have a slowdown at the very end of the supply chain too. But not just for AI companies. I don't want consumers to have to pay way more for chips than they have to for all sorts of other applications, including the phones that we have cast all about us.
Yeah, whose prices also keep going up, by the way. I'm not sure what goes up faster, iPhone or phone prices, not just iPhone, or coffee and Aspen. Those two things, every time they come out here, it's like an extra $1. But you go to that, this may be a little off topic, but like you look at the car industry, right? I was just in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last week. I've got a lot of friends from Detroit. They're terrified of Chinese competition, in part because they can't compete on the labor cost, period, end of story. AI the same way, right? The Kimi model, DeepSeek, these things. How do we regulate so much of what we're doing now? We're trying to figure out how to manage through AI, tokenization, costs, it's all there. And then you got this Chinese models over here where their input costs, the stuff you just talked about, there's 0% chance that we can compete with those. Just like automobiles, because we need to pay our people more than $3 an hour to make a car, right? How do we manage that from a consumer protection, antitrust perspective, your purview? How do we do that with AI? Because there's no freaking way we can compete on cost. Zero.
Yeah, so I'm a little more sanguine on America's ability to compete on cost because of our ability to evolve. And I think one of the things we can do is deregulate, which has been one of the president's main objectives. And one of the things that the FTC did alongside DOJ and basically every other agency of the federal government really early on, consistent with the president's executive order, was we took this huge view at the regulations issued by all of the agencies and asked them to submit to us candidates for regulations that they thought were limiting competition in the industries that they regulate. And we sent like 120 recommended deletions to the White House for huge, gigongous rules across like 15 or 16 different agencies. And we're reviewing other regulations from 5 other agencies right now for a second submission to the White House. But that was just a recognition from the White House that one of the ways America has to remain competitive is that we can't have layer after layer of unnecessary regulations slowing down innovation, particularly when our democratic system is the best system available, but occasionally it is a means for rent seeking. And a lot of the regulations that we were recommending, we basically looked at the history of how the regulations came to be, and the most powerful players in the industry came to Washington and said, you should enact these regulations that will impose costs that we can easily internalize, but our competition will not be able to internalize. And so we were trying to wipe those out of the way to unbottleneck some of these industries. But that is something that America can constantly continue doing, is evolving, stripping out dead, unnecessary regulations that either impose unnecessary costs on everyone or protect incumbents from competition.
Side note, should you decide that with the president or should the courts decide that?
I think the answer is that the president, and then we will have judicial review, which is the system Congress set up, is that the executive branch will decide which regulations need to be adopted and which should be rejected, and then parties injured by those decisions can go to the courts, and the courts are supposed to take a relatively deferential approach to the president's decision-making on that front. And, we have unfortunately witnessed over the last 18 months a shocking lawlessness in the first level of the federal judiciary that eventually gets corrected by the courts of appeals and the Supreme Court, but it takes a long time. The wheels of justice move slowly. But we've had case after case of lawful deregulatory conduct and immigration conduct being carried out by the executive branch that is enjoined by district courts in far-flung districts, eventually resolved in the administration's favor by the courts of appeals and the Supreme Courts, but it slows things down. I actually do think that is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. What district courts have taken on themselves for the last 18 months to do, which is act as a super legislature over the policymaking decisions of the executive branch. We win these cases, but it takes months and months and months to do it, and this has become a real problem.
Though, that's what the fourth branch is there for. They're there.
Third branch.
Well,
we got rid of the fourth branch in slaughter.
Yeah. viewing these, not the Supreme Court, lower level courts, and I say that respectfully, as, to your point, being super judicial, being able to even override Congress in certain things that sounds like you clearly would view as overstepping their power.
Yeah, I think the best example of this early on was the use of temporary restraining orders to try to stop the government from carrying out lawful policy, because temporary restraining orders are ostensibly non-appealable. And so we had this insane raft of TROs being issued from district courts all over the country that got so bad that the courts of appeals and eventually the Supreme Court had to develop a doctrine for when a temporary restraining order is in fact a preliminary injunction and can be appealed, even if the district court has titled it a TRO. That is uncharted territory. The idea that district courts were so adamantly anti-administration that they were going to abuse the temporary restraining order to try to slow down administration policy. This has become a very, very huge problem.
It's become an offensive legal weapon. I think you would agree with that. I mean, you look like the Verrazano Bridge, right? Going over, Staten Island to Brooklyn. Years ago, they were trying to modernize certain things, and there was a bunch of environmental lawsuits. Some of them were brought by trucking unions. Environmental lawsuit brought by truckers because they were just trying to stall it. They were trying to gain some leverage, right? It wasn't really viewed as an environmental thing. So in your view then, Chairman, what would you view as the appropriate level of court? State Supreme Court, Federal Appeals Court, Supreme Court, that would have the authority to do what you're frustrated by?
Well, look, we need courts that have authority to check unlawful executive branch action, and we've had it forever. I think that there is a difference in kind between what courts were doing, heck, in the first Trump administration, in the Biden administration, and what they were doing in the first year of the second Trump administration, where we consistently had to run to the Supreme Court, invoke its emergency authority to get them to stop a lower court from issuing these orders that they were issuing. And I think that is a real delay, even on the deregulatory agenda, because if a district court could just snap its fingers and issue a TRO, and then we're stuck in 12 to 24 months of litigation, even if we win at the end of the day, that's a huge chunk of time that we could have been spent implementing deregulatory policy, that we've been spent litigating, often up and down the chain on emergency dockets. It's just no way to run a railroad. And I don't have a perfect solution for this, but look, I spent much of my career in judicial politics in addition to being a litigator, and I was shocked by the conduct of some of the district courts in the first 12 to 18 months of the administration and the frequency with which we were having to run to courts of appeals and Supreme Courts to get them to check abuses of the lower courts.
You mentioned Europe earlier. I've done a lot of work on Europe's energy problems. Maybe it's not for here, obviously, although AI is actually an energy story in disguise. You don't have AI without the input, the power that you referred to earlier. Europe is in big trouble. They got 55% natural gas storage. They've had 3 very mild winters, very mild summer. This summer was very, very hot. The last 3 previous years, Europe's gotten, let's be clear, just gotten really lucky with mild weather. It's not looking that way this year. But from a technology regulatory perspective, I know that they're also throwing out things. You mentioned them earlier. Boom, boom, boom. They're trying to get ahead of AI. And sounds like in your view, not being fully ready or prepared for it. Is there anything positive that we can learn? Don't laugh. That we can learn from the European regulatory environment? Positive.
Yes, it's that the American appetite for risk is a good thing, and that the American approach to new things, which is let's see how it develops and we can fix problems after they've actually arisen, is the way that you innovate, and that the new must be regulated and understood at the same time. Doesn't work. And I do think, look, you don't have to be critical of Europe's approach to say it's been helpful to have transoceanic laboratories where other countries are trying other approach, sort of like the way that we in the 19th and 20th centuries talked about the states as the laboratories of democracy in America, where we get to see how other countries have tried to balance regulation and innovation. And seem to consistently strike the wrong balance. And you can argue that in individual cases, America hasn't struck the right balance, but our preference for allowing people to take some risks and then addressing problems on the back end, I still think is part of what makes this economy the greatest in the history of the world. And even as it has weathered blows here and there, it still remains wildly more resilient than all of our competitors.
Yeah, because again, if you look at Europe and you dig again, I'm talking my book here a little bit on the energy side, but they've doomed themselves economically, right? The worker that would have a job building cars, I'm not sure there'll ever be a new car plant built in Europe again. Mercedes, BMW, Audi, they're going to build here. They might build in China. I don't know if they can't afford to build a car. Aluminum, Shell just opened up a huge factory in Pittsburgh, and we can argue other things about that, right? We'll save that for a different conference. You can argue the climate impact of that, whatever it may be. But from an economic perspective, Europe, I don't want to say has doomed itself, but it's not looking good. How do we avoid making some of those mistakes where we balance out, to your point, your job is to make sure we can afford stuff, that AI is not hundreds of dollars a month per family because if it is, then once again, you're going to get the stratification of just upper income people getting everything and the rest of us, everybody else sort of left. How do we not become that way with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to just keep resorting to American history, but
We did go to UVA. There's some things around.
Yeah, that's true.
A Jefferson guy, he was all right.
Yeah, he was okay. If we remain a country where innovation is okay and risk-taking is okay, we will remain upwardly mobile. Look, I will be honest, like I have my own concerns about income stratification in America. I mean, on the one hand, I come flying to Aspen on a plane that, like, as it made its approach, I was like 50-50 whether we were gonna die. And we hit the ground.
The good 50 happened.
The good 50 happened. Every time I feel this way,
we still got to go home, though.
I know, yeah. And you see all the private jets, and you go, I'm Catholic. I don't want to be filled with envy for what my neighbor has, but I don't think that
it's okay. I am.
Yeah,
I'm fully
enough.
envious. I'm like, I want that plane. I'll never have it.
But I still think that the risk of aiming for perfect leveling means you will have no innovation, no growth. You have to import your labor from outside of your country or your continent. And I could not agree more with what the National Security Strategy of 2025 said, which is that the importation of third world labor into Europe has dramatically changed European culture and our ability to relate to Europe. And I don't want that to happen either. And I think that the way that you do that is you make this a place where people want to come and where Americans want to build and where they are able to build. And that the way you do that is with a touch of regulatory humility, with an eye to keeping markets open, but not trying to command it from Washington.
Okay. We're winding down. I got my first email like 25 years ago. Can't remember what it was. Then there was a work email. Then there was somebody who said if I sent him money, he would be let out of jail. I'm still waiting for that money. And somehow that scam is still going on, right? And I'm just waiting. The most viewed thing I think I've ever done on CNBC was I interviewed a deep fake version of myself like 2.5 years ago. And if you look at it now, it might as well be 50 years ago because it looks ridiculous. Now you look at it, you go, well, I could clearly tell that's a deep fake. At the time, 2.5 years ago, it looked pretty damn good. Now it's going to look unbelievable. And I'm just like, the AI ripe for scams versus some email asking me to send them money, like you can replicate my mom's voice. Yeah. You can replicate my voice saying, help. There are people who are smart that are already starting to get ripped off by AI scams. And we're at the beginning, Chairman. How do we fight that? It's going to get crazy.
Yeah, it has gotten crazy, and a huge part of this dynamic is that this country is bombarded with foreign scams. I mean, Secretary Rubio was just in Southeast Asia talking about this. Kash Patel was just in Southeast Asia talking about this. In 2023, scam centers in Burma, Laos, and Thailand generated the revenue equivalent to 40% of the GDPs of those three countries combined. And a huge chunk of that is just aimed at the United States. And AI makes this significantly more dangerous. The initial danger is the ease with which you can communicate with Americans from outside of America.
Burma?
Because of the internet.
I would not have had that on my scam bingo card. Laos, Burma.
Scam Center.
I would have thought more like some sort of Eastern Bloc, Georgia, not the state, the country, that area of the world.
We have that too, but South and Southeast Asia, this has become a gargantuan problem.
40% of GDP is now
They
scam.
generated revenue equivalent to 40% of the GDP.
So the
of those
scams
countries.
are working. Somebody's
Yes.
sending money to somebody.
Yes. And they're coming from everywhere. The huge part of this problem is now South and Southeast Asia. Look, there are a couple ways the government's trying to address this. Number one is we are working, especially Brendan Carr at the FCC and the Treasury Department with the banks, are working with the telecom companies to try to slow the rate at which these people can access American telephones by promoting transparency about who's calling me. Right now, a lot of these guys can spoof their phone number to make it look like it's coming from an American phone, when in fact it's coming from India, or the Philippines, or Thailand, or Moldova, or wherever. Requiring the number actually state where it's coming from will be huge, because a lot of Americans are going to be a lot less likely to pick up the phone and answer the phone from a call that it says is coming from a foreign state than from like a random American number.
By the way, second Moldova reference of the day. There was a Wall Street Journal story on Moldova. I think it was today or maybe even yesterday.
Okay.
Moldova. I guarantee you, some people in this patio, when we leave here, we'll get calls tomorrow from a 970 area code, Aspen or whatever it might be. Don't pick it up, because it's probably these people, correct?
I mean,
but what do we do about that? I'm on the do not call registry. I'm still getting 10 a day.
Yeah,
because it's annoying.
Because they're using internet protocol to come into.
But how are they getting through? The do not call registry, they don't care? No one cares?
Well, so this is the other thing about the scammers to bear in mind. All of them are committing crimes that violate the laws of the United States, violate the laws of the country in which they are committing these acts. And it's not just that. A lot of these scam centers are engaged in widespread human trafficking to staff the call centers. They're basically bringing in slaves to run these call centers.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a huge second order problem with these scams, is that the scams are so profitable, the labor can't be up, and so they are importing people from all over the planet to run these scam centers.
Sometimes against their will.
Often against their will, or under false pretenses. So this is like, there's suffice to say that a foreign scammer who is forcibly bringing slaves to run his or her scam center is not going to be terribly afraid of an FTC cease and desist order. They're committing 70 crimes a day to run the scam center.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the FTC has done, and that we are continuing to do, is basically, in order for these scams to work, the scam centers have to participate in the payment system, because the money has to money's being transmitted electronically. A lot of that is over like Cash App or other like direct from bank account apps. But a lot of these scams are ostensibly businesses that purport to offer a product. They sell the product. Product isn't real. There's a credit card transaction and then a chargeback where the consumer is like, I didn't get the product, or I didn't get the service, or this was all a lie. They go to the credit card company, and the credit card company tries to get the money back. We have been bringing cases involving parts of the US payment system that are processing transactions for merchants that they know are committing fraud, because the chargeback rates are astronomically high, or they're burying their head in the sand. They're not doing the underwriting that they're supposed to be doing, and they're just processing these transactions because it's very profitable. That is the way that the FTC has been fighting these scams. In addition to doing normal anti-scam work, is rather than focusing on these scam centers who aren't afraid of us, working with the American payment companies that are processing transactions for these merchants that they know are fraudulent, and saying, we will bring injunctive acts and acts for civil penalties against you if you knew or had reason to know that you were processing fraudulent transactions.
And I want 80% of the people in this room to cover their ears on this one, but do the social media companies or the telecom companies whose services may be being used, they're not scamming anybody, but people are using the platforms, do they bear any liability?
Look, I'm just going to tell, the Secretary Bessent hosted a roundtable for social media companies, the banks, the telcos, and it was me, Brendan Carr, the Fed, and Secretary Bessent. And I'm just going to say what I said in my speech, which this was supposed to be sort of a like, let's all link arms speech. And what I said is, I want to work with social media to fix the scam ad problems on social media. Unsurprisingly, a huge proportion of scams originate now on social media. That's where they spend a lot of their time. And all of the tools that make advertising so useful to legitimate merchants, they can find their target audience with incredible specificity and precision, are equally useful to the scammers who are going to use the tools to do the exact same thing. What we told the social media companies is, we want to work with you to fix it. But we've been trying to work for a long time, and it ain't getting fixed. And eventually, the FTC has to step in to protect consumers from scam ads on your platforms. And the tool I have is civil law enforcement. So we want to work with you, but if we aren't going to work together, then we will figure this out in a courtroom. And that remains my view, is I would rather figure this out together, but if we can't figure it out together, we will let judges and juries decide. And this problem has become so acute. This is such an unbelievable risk to the pocketbook of ordinary American citizens that we can no longer delay.
Civil action is possible against some of the social media companies.
If social media companies are facilitating these scams by burying their head in the sand about their advertisers, then yes, civil action is possible.
What's an appropriate civil penalty?
Depends on the circumstances. Sorry for the lawyerly answer, but you led off with our law degrees, so here we are.
I know. Well, but you're looking at, we've had cases with social media addiction, bless you again, video addiction, some big numbers thrown around, as most lawsuits are, by the way, not just social media, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, look, the United States has a civil penalty statute, and we will apply that statute. I applied it in our settlement with Amazon in the Rosca case. That was $1 billion civil penalty. The statistics that the FTC and the Fed have put out is that it's tens of billions of dollars every year in scams, money lost by American citizens to scams that are facilitated on social media. That has to stop. And if civil penalties are the tool we have to use, we'll use them. Prefer to do this in conjunction with the social media companies. Cheaper, faster, quicker, more likely to achieve instant relief. But if we aren't going to be able to work together, then we'll have to do this in a courtroom.
And then, wrapping it up with this lighthearted question, do we need Democrats on some of your commissions? And if you were a Democratic commissioner, I would ask the exact same question. If there was only Democrats, I would say, do we need Republicans? Because the one thing I love about TPI in this conference, you got members of both parties. We'll have a glass of wine together, have a cup of coffee together. Everybody talks, may not agree on everything, may not agree on the way to get certain things or achieve them. But the fact that the old adage, right, if you're talking, you're not fighting. And that's a good thing. So we don't want to have hyper-partisanship in any aspect of government. How do we, from your perch, accomplish that tiny little goal, Chair Ferguson?
It is the president's prerogative to add more commissioners to the commission, and so I don't want to sort of address that power, which is vested exclusively in him. But I think the FTC is doing great with its current composition of commissioners. We were doing great when Commissioner Holyoke, who's now the U.S. Attorney for the District of Utah, was here. She was a phenomenal colleague, too. Look, we'll just take our win-loss record. When we bring cases, we win them, and that is because the commission is headed by people who have litigated, want to win their cases, and aren't going to bring cases that they don't think that they can win. And sometimes that means we might lose in the district court and win on appeal. That's okay. That's become the cost of doing business in the Trump administration. But we take very seriously the rule of law, and that is going to be true no matter how many commissioners there are, as long as I'm chairman.
Well, you did a great interview, I know, with Scott at TPI, with Commissioner Holyoke about 2 years ago. Any final parting words for this esteemed and no doubt slightly less hot than us crowd? 'Cause I'm hot.
Yeah.
I don't mean looking. I mean like I'm physically hot. I just want to be clear. Although I'm not unattractive. Had to end on a light note.
Look, I'm glad to be here. I think having assemblages like this are important. Look, the laws that the FTC enforces are very broad. A lot of how the FTC does its business is a personnel issue. The laws are broad. We have to make decisions about how to spend resources, and that's why I've tried to do as many events of this variety as I can, because I want people to hear from me how I see the world. But at the end of the day, I have laws that I'm enforcing, and that's what we're doing. And consistent with our win on Friday, my job is to enforce the laws, and I will bring cases if I think we can win them. Yep. And I'm not going to bring them if we don't, even if everyone is baying for us to bring them. It's just how it's going to work. So.
Well, that's music. There's lawyers on both sides here. That's music to their ears. They can afford to come back to Aspen. Chairman Andrew Ferguson, a real pleasure. I want to thank you for making the journey out here. I want to thank everybody for coming out to TPI. I want to thank TPI and Scott and Jane and everybody for having me and CNBC out here as well. Let's get out of these ties and relax. I have a panel tomorrow morning also. Please come to that. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again so much. Big hand for Chairman Andrew Ferguson. Thank you very much.